Lylanne Musselman is a poet, an artist, a playwright, a play director, and a teacher. She lives in Eaton, Indiana. She spreads her love of writing to others by teaching at the University of Indianapolis and Ivy Tech Community College. She's also a mother, a grandmother, and a cat mother. She has five cats. Lylanne's work has been featured in many literary journals and anthologies. She's had six chapbooks published so far. There's another on the way. Makes it sound like she's pregnant, doesn't it? And she's co-authored two books. I will have a link to her website in the show notes for more information. Welcome, Lylanne.
Thank you, Mo, for that wonderful introduction. And also, I have to add, I'm a great grandmother. I have four great grandkids now.
Oh, I'm sorry for leaving that out. Wow. You do not look old enough to be a great
That's
grandmother.
what I'm told, but
Oh.
life has things happen.
Now, I know this is a podcast and it's audio, but you can go on YouTube and listen or watch and listen to this video as well. So, Lylan's conversation with me will be on that. So you can see what she looks like. Also, you can see that behind her on that wall, all of the works of art you're seeing are her works of art. And we'll hopefully have time to talk about that as well. Now, Lylan, you were writing and reading poetry very early on through junior high, and then you dropped it for 20 years and didn't pick it up, until then. What happened?
Oh, that's an interesting story. I loved poetry and I read I was an only child, so I read a lot in my room. And a lot of what I read was like Robert Louis Stevenson, A Garden of Children's Verses, and Mother Goose, and Bible verses, and all that kind of stuff. And then I wrote poetry, how you're in junior high and you're like smitten with somebody and stuff. And I would write little poems and stuff, some that never were seen. Um, and then I guess my life just I got into my art more, even though I'd been doing art all that time too. But I had a high school art teacher that really encouraged my art, and I really was into that and thought that was the way my life was going to go. And then, as life has many twists and turns, I ended up dropping out of college when I was 18 because I thought I was a bad writer. I didn't like writing essays, research papers. I thought I was going to fail. And before I failed, I bailed.
Wow, that
And
was
so,
very harsh on your part.
yeah, yeah. And so, what did I do? I got married at 18. And then I had my oldest daughter 2 years later, and my youngest daughter 3 years after that. So I was a mom, and then I got a divorce 8 years into that marriage because he was abusive, which
Oh,
gives me a lot of fodder for things to write on.
oh, a lot
And
to write about.
yeah. And so I was a single mom. So that's why I wasn't really writing a lot back then. I was mostly just concentrating on art and trying to keep money coming in as a
Yes, an
single
art is
mom.
such a good way to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yes, don't you know it? And so I got jobs that I was a paint bander at a glass company in Hartford City. And then my high school art teacher hired me to coat her handmade paper jewelry. And then I worked for her for years, FB Fogg in Muncie. And she's got a new book out as well just recently.
Okay, you got to back up a minute though.
Yes,
What was the first thing you said you were?
a glass bander.
What is
So
that?
I would twirl like glass on a little wheel and like hold a paintbrush and be
Mm.
very careful about banding glass because if there's any like hairs or you're wacky with it and then it fires, that's the way it fires into it. So steady hand. I did that for a couple years and
I had no idea that's the way it was done.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Now, Lylan, you eventually went back to college and got yourself a bachelor's degree in English with an emphasis in creative writing and a master's degree. Is this necessary for writers?
Well, it was for me to make it valid that I was a writer, because I had dropped out all those years before. So I went back 20 years to the year that I had dropped out, and started college, and I put off English comp until my advisor forced me to take it because that's just how fearful I was of it and stuff. But I got a really cool grad student as a teacher, and I got to write essays about things that I really wanted to write about. And by that time, I'd been through several divorces and life, and I was able to write some stuff. And one of the essays that really sticks out to me that I wrote in that class was how, at that time, this was the 90s, how I was starting to see how Garth Brooks and Reba McEntire were not so much country music as pop, which I had hated country music as a child. And I was, comparing their music to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and how they were different and stuff. And I got an A on that paper, and it really, that just really did something and set something in me. And so um, that teacher encouraged me. And at that time, Indiana had you take two uh, semesters of comp. So I made an A in the first class. And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I'm not as bad as I thought. My second semester, I got the grammar Nazi. And this was before laptops and stuff. So we were still turning papers in hard copies. And she had the dreaded red pen, and my papers had like blood, like they were bleeding red. It's like, oh my gosh,
Oh.
I'm awful. And so I'm never going to make it. But I tell my students now that I chalk it up to two things. One, either it was because I was more mature, I was 20 years older, or B, because I was starting to like to write about things that interest me and also poetry. And I didn't think I would ever take a poetry workshop because you had to be a major, English major. And I was like, that's never happening in this lifetime to me to be an English major and stuff. And so what I did is I went to her office instead of bailing like I did 20 years earlier.
Hmm.
And much to my surprise, she told me I was one of the better writers in the class. And I was like, really? I wouldn't be able to tell that by all the marks all over my paper. And what I was doing, and you can kind of tell by talking to me, is my mind will jump from here to there. Being a creative person, you know this, being a creative person, your mind doesn't always think linear. And when you write essays, especially and research papers for college, you have to be linear. You have to make those connections and make those paragraphs go one after the other. And I had the ideas there. I was just all jumbled up, you know and stuff. And she told me just to pay attention to what she was writing on my papers and to pay attention in class. And it wasn't like the next day or something like a miracle, like the light bulb goes off and it's like, ah. But by the end of that semester, I had gotten it in my head, what I was doing. And I would rather take an essay exam anytime over multiple choice because I can talk myself in and out of multiple choice questions. It's like, oh, well, this really makes sense. But if I can write what I really think or what I really learned, the professor or whoever I'm writing to knows exactly what I mean because I can express myself that way. And I'm very confident in that, obviously, now.
Now, isn't it
Now, but
amazing
it took a
though?
long time for me to get that confident.
But one teacher made a huge difference in your life.
Yeah,
Wow. I
yeah,
love teachers. I love teachers so much. And of course, you are a teacher, and we're going to get to
yeah.
that too. But it does sound as if you eventually came to focus almost exclusively on poetry. Is that correct?
Yes, pretty much. And plays.
And plays.
I
That's
read
true.
play. I took playwriting as well and did workshops and stuff. In fact, my minor is in, my undergrad bachelor's is major in English with emphasis on creative writing, and then my minor is theater and stuff.
Ah,
Yeah,
why does one write poetry?
I like to write poetry because I can express myself in a concise way, and it's a challenge to use the right words, the right images, And, I work with images with my visual art. And so it's fun to try to get all those imagery uh, so that it can create a picture in other people's minds when they read. You can get that from essays and stories, but not as much as poetry, I don't think. And I think people are more apt if they're schooled to like poetry or think that they can like poetry to sit down and read a poem quicker than they would like maybe a short story or something. And so I think that uh, has its merits there too. And actually, when I wrote just recently, well, last year, I published Open Up to Poetry, which is the story of me dropping out and then how I came back to find out that I could write, and then how I teach and have all these poetry books and accolades behind me and stuff now. And I asked students as I was writing that so that I could include it in there. Uh, you know, so many students that I have when I do creative writing classes, because I teach creative writing classes as well, and we'll cover fiction, nonfiction slash memoir, poetry, and playwriting. When we get to poetry, their eyes roll or they're just like, oh. And I was like, you just stabbed me in the heart.
Oh,
It's like poetry is wonderful. Why do you feel that way? And so I asked several of them, and they said that they feel like that they're not smart enough to understand poetry. And that really made me feel sad. And so what I do is I read them some of my poetry. I read them some of like Billy Collins and, Mary Oliver and other, and they're like, oh. So I don't know. I think that they think that it's like back in the, Victorian age and they have to figure things out, Shakespeare or whatever, and they have to really know all the words and stuff. But then when they hear that, I write poems, well, like I did about my mother's dementia, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Um, but it brings it home and people can relate. And it's like, oh, I think I can do that. And then I think my goal is every class to at least get one student that will say at the end, I really like this, or you really changed my mind about poetry. And it happens, sometimes more than one. So that makes me happy.
oh, you've accomplished a lot. It is strange, though, that students and people in general think poetry is some kind of elite art form when it really isn't. I mean, we can cite poets of the past, and you mentioned Billy Collins. Love his poetry.
Yeah.
Simple and accessible and approachable.
Well, he's called the people's poet. And I know that being in academia, that there are some English professors that like kind of, poo-poo him or whatever. But I tell my students, he's very successful, obviously. And I'll tell you what, during the COVID lockdown, one of the best things that happened was that he got online on Facebook and he and his wife did a Facebook Live. I think, well, it lasted through COVID, and it lasted a couple more years after that, where at 5 o'clock you could sign in and you were just part of his audience and you could talk to him through chat and stuff. And that was during the time my mom died, and they even mentioned my name on his podcast and stuff, about they were sorry that, she had passed and stuff. But just to hear him read and to hear his thought process and to he had people from all over the world and stuff. And so there's still a group of us that are on a Facebook uh, thing called Cool People, the Night People, because that's what we called ourselves. Because that was one of the things that he had said and stuff. But anyway, so Billy Collins is, he's a really cool guy, and I really enjoyed uh, his, kind of mentoring us all and stuff.
Nice.
It didn't matter who you had MFA degrees, doctorate degrees, or you were somebody that had never written a line of poem uh, ever, he was welcoming and stuff. And that's what I would like to think I am.
Now you do a lot of readings of your poetry. What is that like? Is that intimidating at all?
You know, No, I remember the very first time I read, I was at Ball State where I got my bachelor's degree. And I remember going into this coffee shop and I remember reading a poem and my hands shaking and my knees knocking so hard that I thought I was going to pass out or something. But there was something very exhilarating about it. And I have never gone to a poetry reading as just a audience member and they presented an open mic that I didn't participate and read at least one poem. And of course, I have enough books and cred behind me that I will be offered to be a featured reader here and there. And it's quite an honor to be able to do that. And so when you're a featured reader, you get usually 15 to 20, sometimes 40 minutes to read from your work, and then people can question and stuff like that. And I love that stuff. You can tell I love talking about poetry and writing, so it's not hard to engage.
Have you ever gotten any negative feedback during these?
No,
Oh, good.
no,
Good. Not that
no,
I'm not that I'm looking for
no,
that. I'm
don't
just wondering.
put that out into the air, but no. That's one of the nice things that I tell students that, especially students that haven't read before out in public. Um, One of the best feelings is to read your work and then have people come up to you afterwards and say, I didn't know somebody had that same experience, or my mom had dementia. And when you read that, I know exactly what that meant. And it just like, yes, it's the human connection. And that's what I think poetry is and should be, a human connection.
How hard was it to write about your mother's dementia?
Well, I say that poetry has kept me from a lot of therapy bills. And so that's through all my rocky and awful relationships I've had in life. And then with my mom's dementia, I was her caregiver. And as the only child, I couldn't not. My mom and I had a very interesting relationship. We'll put it that way. It's like, I loved her dearly, but I was never who she wanted me to be, you know. I She wanted me to be frilly and a girly girl, and I have never been that. And then she wanted me to marry doctors or lawyers, and I did not do that. So and she never understood my creativity. She just never got it. And she was like, why are I mean, she enjoyed my art, and then she would go to me to art shows with me. And if I didn't win something, she'd be like, well, yours is better than that, and say it too loud. It's like, ah, shush. So she was supportive in her own way, but she never was very encouraging. She wasn't somebody that like hung my art on the refrigerator or did anything like that. And speaking of teachers, I had a first kindergarten teacher that called my mom into the classroom because of a ladybug that I had drawn. And she said it was like so realistic that she had never seen anybody that age. And of course, this was way back in the day. So, but she had never seen anybody do the collars and everything, and encourage my mom to encourage me, which she kind of didn't, but I was there for that meeting and that registered, and I never forgot that. And then in my high school, I told you I had my high school art teacher that was very encouraging. And I didn't know this until 20 years later because my high school art teacher and I are still friends to this day. Um, so I'm lucky she's still with us and very inspirational. But she told me that my mom and my grandma came to her one day after school and told her to quit encouraging me with my art. And so that was very that it didn't shock me, but she said she has never forgotten that she had never had any parent ever come and say not to
Oh,
encourage.
that's terrible. That is terrible.
So anyway, there's that with my mom. So, you know, I I would not trade anything. It was like I was living in Indianapolis at the time. I'd moved back from Michigan, and both my parents got ill about the same time, 2017. And my dad went in the hospital and then he ended up going into rehab and different things, never came home after January, died in June of 2017. And my mom was diagnosed with dementia about a month after he was in the hospital
Oh,
and stuff. And so then by July of that year, I moved into my childhood home, which is mine now, is where I am, my childhood home. Um, I couldn't pass that up because, rent.
yes.
So there's that. But um, this is the chapbook, and that's my mom on the cover. That's my painting of my mom on the cover, staring dementia in the face. And while she was with dementia and I was caregiving, it was a very frustrating time, obviously, not only because of our relationship, but because of just the circumstances. I just felt trapped. I was fortunate enough that my grandkids, two or three of them, were at the age that they were either just driving or they were like in juniors, seniors in high school. So they could come and sit with her and give me like an hour or two break. But that was only about the only breaks that I ever got until I ended up having to put her in the nursing home because of all the falls and stuff. But during this time, I was jotting down things that she would say or things that I was experiencing and stuff. And so after she died, I just started collecting them and revising them and stuff. And that's what this ended up to be. Would you want me to read like one of my?
Yes, please. I'm glad you suggested that.
Okay, well, I will read each day, which was also nominated for a push card. It didn't win, but hey, I'm happy with it. Each day, she doesn't think she needs anyone to stay with her, to take care of her, make sure she eats, make sure she takes meds at the right time, the right dosage, make sure she doesn't fall as she toddles down the hallway like a 2-year-old with her walker. She gets mad when told, "You can't stay alone." Each day she gets crankier and glares at me as if I'm her arch enemy. Me, her only child, who put my freedom on hold to keep her free from the fate of the nursing home she dreads. She argues she's just fine as she repeats herself every 5 minutes, as she accuses me of stealing her mail, of being mean to her, as she mockingly calls me Mom for reminding her to do mundane things, as she forgets the birthdays of those she loves, as she attempts to change TV channels and the mobile phone with the mobile phone and wonders why it isn't working.
Was it cathartic to write about your mother's dementia?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And I was just talking to some people recently that she ended up dying in November of 2020 during COVID and stuff. And so the last time was able to hug her was March of 2020. And so we went through the summer of we could meet her outside at the nursing home and have a 10-foot table between us. And we had to have the masks on. She never understood why we were wearing masks or why we couldn't be closer and stuff. And so the very last time I saw her was through the window of a nursing home, like you saw on the nightly news
Oh,
of
so
people
sad.
doing
I
stuff.
mean,
So
so frustrating.
yeah.
Well, let's turn.
So I need to write about that as well. There's things still left that I didn't cover from the caregiving perspective, but then of what it was like during the pandemic perspective.
I understand from people who had someone in hospitals or care facilities at that time that it was nightmarish.
Yeah, it was. So you ask about why write poetry. That gives me an outlet. And so, when you know how to do it, and that comes into why you go take classes or workshops, you don't need an MFA, I don't think. The thing is just to write. Write, get those feelings down on the page. That's what I tell my students
Well, let's
to.
talk about your playwriting. Tell me
All right.
about that.
My playwriting took a hit when I was taking care of my mom, and but I'm just now starting to get back into it. And 6 years after COVID and stuff. Um, but I'd had a lot of success with it before that. And I've had seven one acts, well, 10-minute one acts produced, um, not only in Michigan, one in Muncie, one twice in Connecticut, and one in Florida and stuff. And Frida Kahlo Heartbreaker has been probably my most successful 10-minute play and stuff. And so I think about maybe revisiting that and lengthening it to maybe a full length, or maybe just like moving on to a different aspect of that. But I love playwriting. And, I said how much I love for people to come up after I've read and say something to me. There's also nothing like seeing your characters come to life on the stage and then hearing the applause or the laughter or the gasp of what you've written.
I like
So,
to make people cry.
yeah, well, there's that. I
I've
didn't
got
want to be
one
too
play that's a
specific.
dramedy, and people will cry at every performance, but they laugh too. I give them
Yeah,
that. Hmm.
yeah. And so it's a great feeling. And so I've just been hankering to get back into that. In fact, this fall, I'm going to talk to somebody tomorrow about teaching a class that will incorporate some playwriting in it, and I'm hoping that through that I will be able to maybe direct and get back into directing and maybe writing my own plays and getting some of those back out into the world. So
You've got a lot of plans.
I
I want
do.
to talk about your art. Now, you mentioned
Yes.
earlier how the art sort of connects with the poetry in terms of you're trying to bring things to life in a very visual way. Tell me about your art, and let me say before you do, you've won a lot of awards for it, have you not?
I've won well over 150 some over the years and stuff. So I've lost count. So yeah, I enjoy exhibiting. I don't exhibit as widely as I used to. A lot of it's getting very expensive and stuff. And we know in these times, money is an issue with gasoline, toting the stuff all around and stuff. But no, I love to do portraits. So a lot of the portraits you see are um, grandkids, great grandkids. The one up here in the corner and over in this corner is my high school art teacher uh, and
Nice.
stuff. So, so tributes. I like to do a lot of bird paintings, and of course, cats and dogs. I'm a
Well,
dog lover, even though I have my five cats,
I think
but
your five cats don't want probably dogs
a
as well.
dog, well, my lifestyle doesn't want dogs because I'm in and out so much, and they are pretty much self-sufficient, the kitties.
I will say, I want to remind people you do work on commission, do you not? And it looks,
I do.
as you said, as if you do both people and pets.
Yes. Yeah, I do a lot of pet portraits. In fact, I just finished up one a couple weeks ago and stuff. And so summer is really a good time to like hit me up because I'm not teaching as many classes during the summer as I do in the fall. Um, that's usually when I have like about 4 or 5 comp or creative writing classes going. And I do teach some workshops intermittently, and I'm doing one of those right now. I have taught art too in the past, but I just find that I enjoy teaching the writing so much and it's easier. I don't have to carry as much with me. I just have a little book bag. With art, I have to take paints or pastels and stuff
Okay,
with me to
I'm
teach.
I'm going to be very mean. I'm going to be very
Okay,
mean right now, Lylan. If you could only do one, which would you choose, the art or the writing?
find a way to incorporate.
You're looking for a workaround, aren't you?
But that's the thing. I love my art, and it's, but I've gone months without doing it where I don't. I write daily something, even if it's just revision. I'm always tinkering with my words. So I don't know. I would hate to say that I might go with word spinning.
That's a terrible question, isn't it? I've given
It
you a
is.
lady or the tiger question.
That's like Sophie's Choice.
And just a reminder to anyone listening that this video will be on YouTube, so you can go and look at all the many, many works of art that are hanging on Lylanne's wall behind her. Um,
Even though I can see it's kind of backwards from my perspective. But
I know, but it still looks great. I like the rich colors. They tend to be kind of dark.
yeah, well,
Well, let's talk about your teaching. What does
yes,
that? You have some writing workshops in addition to teaching regular classes?
yes. So I teach the university classes for Ivy Tech and University of Indianapolis, and I enjoy, well, at the University of Indianapolis, it's usually just the regular college age kids, so the young kids. Ivy Tech Community College is like what it says. So being a non-traditional student myself, I'm always happy to see older students, and I've had students in some of my classes that are 80 and mixed in with some that are 18, 19, and it's just a fun thing to do. And some of them are like me when I was 18. They don't want to be in a comp class that where they're dreading writing and stuff, but I tell them my story, and that just kind of lightens things up, and they know that I'm somebody that's approachable and stuff. And so pretty much, unless somebody doesn't show up or turn work in, unless they're just really, really awful, which I've never really had anybody that I couldn't like help them to improve and stuff. And in fact, University of Indianapolis has been having me teach some basic writing classes because they know my story, and so that I can help some of these students that come in and aren't ready for the next level, so I can get in there and help them. And then I've had some of those students follow me into the next level because I teach that too. So that's a nice thing that they liked me well enough, or they thought that was, a good thing. And so there's that. And so I teach creative writing at Ivy Tech and comp at Ivy Tech. And then I teach strictly poetry at the Indiana Writer Center, and that's on Zoom. So, like, you could be in Michigan, Pennsylvania, wherever, and still take a class off of me, and that's through the Indiana Writer Center. And I'm in the middle of one now, but we're talking about starting an open up to poetry class later in the fall.
Well, we'll have to put that link in the show notes then if it is
Yeah,
available everywhere.
yeah. And then I teach for the EB Ball Center in Muncie, Indiana, which those are face-to-face classes. And the way I structure that class is that I read them like one of my poems. I choose something like right now, I'm in a session. And so we just met Tuesday. So next Tuesday, we have 3 sessions uh, in a little compact time period, 2 hours. I chose a classic that I was wanting to target for any of the students that came in for this. I've got some students that I've been teaching there 2 years. I've got some students that have never missed a session, and I've have maybe about 6 or 7 a year there. And there's brand new students that come and go, and some that come sometimes and then come back maybe a year later. Um, but I have it so that I have something that we're concentrating on, and then I will read one of my poems, or I will read something like from Billy Collins, or, sometimes I use essays too, like from Brevity or something. Um, and then I will develop a prompt from whatever that I've just shared with them, and then they get to write for like 10 minutes. And then, you know, and some of them are working towards things that they want to either leave for their children, grandchildren. Some of them want to get published. That's one of their goals. I mean, so I'm there to help them do anything. And it can be poetry or prose, because what I'm wanting them to do is just get their ideas out on the page, and then they can formulate it into an essay, a vignette, or a poem. And if they need guidance, then they have me to ask.
Last question, Lylanne.
Yes.
And I expect big things from you on this question, on this
Oh,
answer, because
wow.
you are a teacher. What advice would you have for other writers?
What advice would I have for other writers to write? That sounds pretty silly. I have so many of the students that I have all ages that say they get into writer's block, and I tell them I don't believe in writer's block. I know that people say that there is that, but I tell them if you just sit down with your journal, and I carry one with me all the time. If I'm even going just to Meyer or something, I'll just put my journal in my bag because I might see something that I might want to jot down or have an idea or something. But if you sit and you have no clue what to write about, you feel like you're blank, there's nothing, I just say, start writing. I don't know what I'm going to write about. And so all of a sudden, when you start your hand moving across the page or the keyboard, your mind starts loosening up. And so, why do you think that you get your best ideas when you're driving in a car or in the shower? Because you're not forcing yourself to think of something to write about. They just like, you're just da da da. Oh, that's a lovely scenery. Oh, what's that? And then you start thinking, oh, well, that would be a good play or that would be a good poem or whatever and stuff. But it's like, oh, I'm in the car. I can't write. So you have to like either dictate it to yourself or keep repeating it to yourself over and over till you get to a stoplight or something.
Mhm.
And, but I think that when you try to force yourself to write, that that is when you are your own worst enemy. And we also know that we're our own worst enemy when we are telling ourselves we can't write, like I did my former self. Yeah, so when I didn't have the confidence, I think to myself what all I would have missed out on. But then I think if I didn't have that story, it wouldn't be as interesting. So actually, it gives me a little bit of an edge.
I always blamed my parents for my not being a successful novelist in my 20s because I had a happy childhood. I
Ah,
did not have the kind of dysfunctional, addiction-ridden secrets of a family
yeah,
that I write about. And I'm like,
yeah,
Mom and Dad, look what you've done to me. It's taking me a lot longer to really generate some good writing material.
yes.
I did lie about that being the last question because I do have one more for you, Lylan.
Okay.
Because you are in an extremely fortunate position. You get to make a living from your creativity. I know that you work hard. I'm not suggesting anything less, but you don't have to have a day job that's completely separate from who you are as a creative. How does that feel?
It's good and hard both at the same time because as an adjunct instructor, it's, iffy. And so you never know if you're going to be cut out of a class that you thought you were going to have when somebody that's full time has one of their classes fall through and they want to take yours or whatever. So there's that. But I've been pretty fortunate because very rarely has that happened. Um, but it has. Um, I thought when I was living in Ohio for a while, I came very close to being a full-time instructor, and that kind of fell through, not through any fault of my own or through my superior, because they kept going to the board trying to get me on as the creative writing person, which would have been my dream job. And they wouldn't give them the money for it and stuff. And it was a community college there, which I just found out just last week that they may be getting scooped up by either Owens Community College or Ohio State or something. It was very weird. So maybe it's all for the best.
You know,
So
education undergoes changes just like all the other institutions.
yeah, yeah. So, but I do get to, I've been able to get my foot in the door to where I am teaching at the Indiana Writers Center and at EB Ball Center. And so I get to, um, come up with my own classes and stuff. And they know that the students enjoy working with me. And so then they keep asking me back. So that makes me feel good. And so that is a little bit of income here and there and stuff. And like I said, I have an interview tomorrow that I'm going to take this idea about a creative writing class that incorporates playwriting into that as well. And so if that comes about, that'll be another way. And then commissions from artwork or award money. Sometimes I don't get the big, big, big awards with thousands of dollars, but hey, $50 here, $150 there. At one point, I did win $500 for one of my poems, so that's the most money I've ever won.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so that was a big get. So, yeah, when I say award winning, I'm not just saying that haphazardly, it's really true.
Well, I am very happy for you. I'm a little jealous of you that you get to do this, that you get to be a creative full time. I understand that teaching is hard, but you're also teaching something you love, so that's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. Well, you can be jealous, but also when you see me checking my checkbook and my savings account every every day, saying, "Oh, did something come out or whatever?" You might not be as jealous, but it all works out in the end. So I am the happiest right now I've probably been in life because I am doing what I enjoy doing. And if it wasn't for money issues and for gas and grocery prices going up and up, if they would stayed, I might have been like, finally, I'm finally making things, but there's always a challenge. So, hey, if there wasn't that, what would life be if everything was just, hey, I'm happy.
Well, you're a writer. You know that a story doesn't start until
That's right.
something goes wrong.
There has to be tension and conflict.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I know people will enjoy listening to it.
Oh, I
It's
hope so.
inspiring.
Well, thank you, Mo. I appreciate you asking me on. And remember, I have a new book coming out in October or November. So, you know,
What is the name of it?
it's In My Life, a pop culture poetry memoir. And
When
so
it's
that,
available, give me the link and I will add it to the show notes.
and the reason that came about is because a lot of my poetry incorporates like the Beatles, Sonny and Cher, Elton John, just music thing and, just cultural things. And people like that. They enjoy that when I read out. They're like, I really like that. So I had plenty. And so I finally got them into a collection that I felt like had some cohesiveness to it. And so it's going to be published by Chatterhouse Press the end of this year, 2026.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Look for the Write Like a Badass podcast wherever you find podcasts and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.